The Mirepoix Hospital was a very fine hospital, large and clean, and thanks to Mr. Father's enormous generosity, it was equipped with everything that could possibly be needed for curing every kind of illness. Tistou didn't find it ugly. However, there was something inexplicably sad he felt within the hospital. Dr. Sympathetic, who was in charge of the hospital, was a very learned man, and Tistou thought he was rather like Moustache, the gardener.
Mm-hmm. The resemblance is no doubt due to the fact that Moustache tends to the life of plants, and I tend to the lives of human beings.
Tistou quickly realised that tending the lives of human beings was a lot more difficult. Being a doctor was a constant battle. On the one hand, there was disease ready to slip into people's bodies, and on the other, there was good health ready to slip out. And then there were thousands of kinds of disease, and only one kind of good health. Tistou could not quite understand why he was feeling this sudden sadness, since this is a place where good health comes to life. Everything ought to be happy. Dr. Sympathetic showed him around the hospital, and then, finally, a room in which a little sick girl was lying, and there he left Tistou, as he had other patients to attend to. "Hello," he said to her. She was about the same age as Tistou, very pretty, but very pale. "Hello," she replied politely, as she stared at the ceiling without moving her head. "Dr. Sympathetic tells me that your legs won't walk. Are they any better since you've been here?"
No, but it doesn't matter.
"Why not?"
Because I've got nowhere to go.
"I've got a garden," said Tistou, just to say something.
You're lucky. If I had a garden, I would want to get well in order to walk in it.
If that's all she needs to make her happy, thought Tistou, and started rubbing his thumbs. "At least you're not unhappy?"
To know unhappiness, you've got to have experienced being happy first. I was born with my bad legs.
So this was where the inexplicable sadness of the hospital came from. "There's no doubt," thought Tistou, "if this little girl's going to get well, she must have something to look forward to, and a growing flower asks a fresh riddle every day, with their unfolding and their flourishing. Yes, they will definitely help her." Tistou's thumbs were very busy. "I think you're going to get well."
Do you think so?
"Absolutely. Just wait and you'll see. Goodbye."
Goodbye. You're lucky to have a garden.
Outside, Dr. Sympathetic awaited Tistou and asked him what he'd learned today. "I've learned that there is no medicine for a broken heart. I've learned that in order to get well, you must want to live. Oh, Doctor, aren't there any pills that give people the will to live?" Dr. Sympathetic was surprised to find so much wisdom in such a small boy.
You have discovered and learnt the most important thing there is to know for a doctor in only one day, Tistou.
"And the second most important thing?"
Well, to be a good doctor, you must love your fellow men.
Even more surprised was Dr. Sympathetic when, next day, he entered the little girl's room and saw her awake, smiling, and standing up in the middle of a beautiful meadow full of flowers. She was full of joy, and her heart was full of the willingness to live. Some time passed by, and there was a sudden change in the shining house. Insinuations in secretive whispers like tension, crisis, worsening, words of ill omen, inevitable war, poor people, war, just another war. How terrible. Tistou went to see Mr. Moustache. "I hope I'm not interrupting you, Mr. Moustache, but could you tell me what you think of war?"
I am against it.
"Why are you against it?"
Because even a little unimportant war can destroy a very big garden.
"Really? Have you ever seen a garden destroyed by war?
Oh, yes. I've seen it happen. I've seen a garden full of flowers die in 2 minutes. So many bombs fell in that garden it wasn't even worth cultivating it again. Even the earth was dead.
Tistou felt his throat tighten. And whose garden was it?
It was mine,
said Moustache, turning away to hide his grief. Tears began to run down Tistou's cheeks. Well, I shall go and tell everyone, he cried. Everyone must know. Amelia and Carolus and...
Carolus was worse off than me. He lost his country.
His country? How is that possible?
His country completely disappeared. He could never find it again. That's why he's here. But there's worse than that. Amelia the cook lost her son. Others have lost arms or legs or even their heads. Everyone loses something in a war.
Tistou now understood that war was the greatest and most horrible disorder that could happen because everyone lost something or someone they loved. I must go and see Mr. Turnbull. He absolutely hates disorder. Mr. Turnbull, who was sitting behind his desk, did not even look up at Tistou when he entered his office.
Ah, Tistou, I'm very busy today. You know, when a war breaks out, our work is doubled.
Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Turnbull. I just wanted to know where the war has broken out.
Oh, all right then. Okay, let me quickly explain. Do you see this desert? This desert belongs to nobody. But on the right, there is a country, and on the left, there is a country, who both want the desert because they do not want the other country to have the desert.
Are there any gardens in this desert?
No, there is only sand and stones.
So they're fighting over sand and stones they don't even want.
Not over the sand, underneath the sand where there is oil. And oil is needed because it's indispensable for fighting wars.
But that's completely idiotic. And just then Mr. Turnbull, who was furious and overworked, slapped Tistou across the cheek, and Tistou's face stung like never before. Is that where war gets you? You ask for a simple explanation. You want to understand, and then you get slapped. Tistou's eyes welled up with tears. Oh, how would Mr. Turnbull feel if I grew holly and thistles in his trousers? I bet that would sting as bad as my slapped cheek, thought Tistou. And just like that, he had a brilliant idea. The factory had been manufacturing arms night and day ever since the war had been declared, so this gave Tistou the opportunity to wander around whilst everyone was so busy, almost unnoticed. Mr. Father was watching all the departments. However, he was pleasantly surprised to see Tistou take such interest in the family business, walking slowly along cases containing rifles, climbing into the trucks, leaning over the engines and slipping in amongst the big cannons.
Well done, Tistou,
he thought.
I'm proud of you.
There was an even bigger surprise to come some days later. The highly unexpected news that the war had come to an end, without a winning side or a losing side, without an international conference, without anything at all, really. Climbing, clinging plants had taken over all the cases of arms. Ivy or knotgrass had made it impossible to unpack any of the cases with the needed guns and revolvers. Rifles had been rendered useless. Brambles and stinging nettles had grown on the seats inside the tanks, making it impossible to drive them. A rain of foxgloves, bluebells and cornflowers bombarding one country, the other country replying with a flood of buttercups, daisies and roses. Countries are not conquered with roses, and battles of flowers have never really been taken seriously. Peace was concluded between the two countries, the armies retired, and the desert was left once again to the sky, to solitude, and to freedom. It was so silent that morning. Not a sound from the factory that was no longer manufacturing. Everything was perfectly still. Sometimes silence itself wakes you up. Tistou jumped out of bed and ran over to Moustache, who was beaming with delight.
Ah, Tistou. Oh, I have to say, I am so impressed with your work. I couldn't have hoped for a more successful outcome. Now there's nothing more I can teach you. You know as much as I do, and you work with such speed.
Coming from such a master as Moustache, the compliment warmed Tistou's heart. By the stables, Tistou found Gymnastique and whispered into his soft brown ears, "Isn't it wonderful? I've stopped a war with flowers." The shining house was beginning to wake up, and strangely not to its normal brightness. Everyone was so agitated, and conversation sounded like a thunderstorm.
"Ruin, dishonour, bankruptcy, unemployment,"
shouted Mr. Father.
"Oh, my guns, my beautiful guns. Oh, if only I could find the wretch who sowed flowers amongst my guns."
Tistou advanced bravely across the flowered carpet till he stood right under the huge crystal chandelier. He took a deep breath and then said, "It was me who sowed the flowers amongst the guns," and then shut his eyes, expecting another slap across the cheek. But nothing happened, so he opened them again. Mr. Father and Mr. Turnbull stood there stunned. Perhaps they had not heard or understood him, or perhaps they just didn't believe him. So Tistou told them all about the growing he'd been responsible for, from the morning glories in the slums to the roses in the prison and the meadow in the little sick girl's room at the hospital. And still Mr. Father and Mr. Turnbull went on staring as if they had become statues. He left the room with his cheek unmarked, which shows that courage always has its reward. Then Mr. Turnbull said,
"It will not be easy to recover from a setback of this kind. Our products will be viewed with suspicion for a long, long time to come, but what's the use of punishing Tistou? It's no good trying to oppose the forces of nature."
Mr. Turnbull had certainly changed.
"I'm not as concerned for the future of the factory as I am for Tistou's,"
said Mr. Father to Mrs. Mother.
"It's true, we thought that he would succeed me as I succeeded my father."
It was a ready-made idea, and a very convenient one.
"Yes, it was. You're absolutely right. Now we must find another. Oh, it's obvious that the boy has no taste for war and arms manufacturing, and that his vocation is more towards agriculture. And what Mr. Turnbull said about no good to oppose the forces of nature is also true. But how about working with the forces of nature and making use of them? Oh, my dear wife, this is my decision."
"I am sure it will be an admirable one," said Mrs. Mother, her eyes dewy with tears, for at that moment Mr. Father's face wore a movingly heroic expression, and his hair shone brighter than ever.
"We shall transform the gun factory into a flower factory."
The plan was immediately put into action, and the success was electrifying. And it is a well-known fact that great businessmen become great because they are able to recover from sudden changes by being adaptable. Mirepoix changed its name to Mirepoix les Fleurs. Mr. Turnbull was put in charge of publicity and worked hard on the slogans. "Plant flowers which grow in a single night. Mirepoix flowers grow anywhere, even on steel." The best slogan was, "Say no to war, but say it with flowers." Orders poured in, and prosperity returned to the shining house. And Tistou, well, he became quite famous throughout the world, and no longer had to hide his secret about his green thumbs. But more importantly, he was happy. Stories never end when you think they're going to, and you may even think that everything there was to say has already been said. However, one morning, Moustache had failed to wake up.
"Moustache has decided to sleep forever,"
explained Mrs. Mother to Tistou. "Can I go and see him sleeping?"
No, you can't go and see him. He's gone on a long journey and won't ever come back.
Tistou found this very difficult to understand. People don't go on journeys with their eyes shut. There is something very odd about this. They're trying to hide something from me. Yes, indeed, everyone tried to explain a very difficult situation by making it even more unlikely. What? He's in the sky? He's in the earth? Gymnastique, Tistou's pony, however, said it as it was.
I know where Moustache is. He's dead.
Dead? But there hasn't been a war, has there?
You don't need a war to die. Moustache is dead because he was very old. Every life comes to an end.
Tistou felt the sun lose its gold. The field turned dark, and put his arms around the pony's neck and cried into his mane.
Cry away, Tistou, cry away. It'll do you good. Grown-ups stop themselves from crying, but they're wrong. Their tears become frozen inside them, and that's what makes their hearts so hard.
So Tistou went to Moustache's grave and tried to awaken him with every flower he could think of, thinking that Moustache would not be able to resist a fine peony, a sensitive rose, a gardenia, mimosa, tuberose, or a flower he didn't know. However tired Moustache was, surely his curiosity would wake him up. But the grave remained a grave, and Moustache did not awaken or respond. Tistou went back to Gymnastique. Do you know, Gymnastique?
Yes, I know. You've discovered that death is the only sad thing that flowers can't keep from happening. That is why men are so stupid when they try to kill each other.
For several days, Tistou could think of nothing else and busied himself with a new project. He wanted to make a ladder in the middle of the field. The ladder's roots must be sound and solid, and he began by growing 2 fine tall trees. Their trunks had something of the elegance of an Italian poplar, but with the toughness of a yew tree. The trees grew with great speed to over 180 feet, and soon they were over 300 feet high. In between he grew wisteria, and all of a sudden it flowered and looked like a lavender waterfall pouring from the sky. If Moustache is really up there, as everyone says, he's certain to take advantage of the ladder and come down and see me, even if it's only for a moment. We never said goodbye to each other. But in spite of it all, Moustache did not climb down to earth. I'll just wait for another 3 days, and then I shall surely know what to do. After 3 nights, he woke up, jumped straight out of bed and ran into the meadow, and noticed that Gymnastique had tried to gnaw through Tistou's trees, but the trunks were too hard and his teeth not strong enough. You mean you wanted to cut down my beautiful ladder? Why? Was it to stop me from climbing it?
Yes,
said Gymnastique. There were pearls of dew on the grass, and in the pale light of the dawn, Tistou saw 2 huge tears shining in the pony's eyes. When horses cry, it is always for an important reason. Really, Gymnastique, what are you worried about? You know I never feel giddy. And don't worry, I'll bring you back a little star. And up Tistou climbed with lightness and agility. Soon his nightshirt looked no larger than a handkerchief, and then a pea, and then a grain of dust, till there was no more ladder to climb, and he was engulfed by the clouds. And now wings seemed to appear from his back. Tistou heard a voice that sounded like Moustache's, only a bit louder and deeper.
So, there you are.
And then he disappeared into that mysterious world of which even people who write stories know nothing about. As soon as Tistou was out of sight, Gymnastique began grazing as quickly as he could, even though he wasn't hungry at all, so that when everyone came out into the garden to look for Tistou, they found written in the meadow by Gymnastique's own mouth, Tistou, was an angel.